Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Warrior's Return. Walter Stone stood at his kitchen window, watching the rain streak down the glass as Seattle's gray morning light filtered through the clouds. At 42, he still carried himself with the rigid posture of a career Marine, though the war in Afghanistan had left invisible scars that ran deeper than the shrapnel wounds across his back. 3 years had passed since his medical discharge. 3 years since an IED had ended his 20-year military career and nearly his life. The nightmares had mostly faded, replaced by the routine of civilian existence that felt as foreign to him as the Afghan mountains once had. Coffee's getting cold. Miranda Stone called from the dining room, her voice carrying the particular edge she developed since his return. At 36, she remained beautiful in the calculated way of women who understood their power over men. Auburn hair always perfectly styled, makeup applied with surgical precision even for breakfast at home. Walter had met Miranda 4 years ago at a military appreciation event in San Diego. She'd been volunteering, serving coffee to servicemen with a smile that seemed genuine and eyes that listened when he talked about his deployments. After 18 months of long-distance courtship, they'd married in a small ceremony attended mostly by his Marine brothers and her small circle of friends. The honeymoon phase had lasted exactly until his injury. "Dad, are you okay?" The voice belonged to Lucas Stone, Walter's 14-year-old son from his first marriage. The boy had moved in with him 2 years ago when his mother died in a car accident, and Walter could see echoes of his own stubborn determination in Lucas's dark eyes. "Just thinking, son." Walter turned from the window, noting how Lucas instinctively positioned himself closer to his father than to Miranda. The kid had good instincts, something Walter had been quietly encouraging through weekend camping trips and martial arts lessons. Miranda appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in designer workout clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I'm heading to the gym," she announced, barely glancing at Lucas. "Don't wait lunch for me. I have appointments this afternoon." Walter had noticed the pause, the way her eyes flickered away when she mentioned her appointments. In Afghanistan, such tells usually preceded ambushes. "Which gym?" he asked casually, though he already knew she'd lie. "The usual one. Platinum Fitness on Capitol Hill." Another lie. Walter had driven past Platinum Fitness yesterday. It had been closed for renovations for 3 weeks. After Miranda left in her white BMW, Walter sat across from Lucas at the breakfast table. The boy was picking at his eggs, a sure sign something was troubling him. "Talk to me, Lucas." "It's probably nothing," the teenager said, then looked up with eyes too old for his face. "Miranda's been getting weird phone calls. Late at night, when she thinks we're asleep. She whispers a lot, sometimes laughs in this different way." Walter's combat instinct stirred, the same hyper-alertness that had kept him alive through 3 deployments. "How long has this been going on? Maybe 6 months?" "It got worse after you started those night classes at the college." The night classes were Walter's cover for the private investigation course he'd been taking, partly to develop new skills, partly because sitting at home with Miranda's increasingly obvious deceptions was driving him insane. What Lucas didn't know was that his father had also been conducting his own surveillance. "Lucas, I need you to trust me on something. If anything ever feels wrong, I mean really wrong, you call me immediately, day or night." Walter pulled out a burner phone he'd purchased weeks ago. "This is just for emergencies. Hide it. Don't let Miranda see it." The boy pocketed the phone without question, a soldier's son who understood that sometimes adults had to operate on incomplete information. That afternoon, Walter drove to a parking garage 6 blocks from where Miranda claimed to be working out. From his vantage point on the 3rd level, he had a clear view of the coffee shop where she'd been meeting Curtis Hawkins for the past 2 months. Curtis was everything Walter wasn't. Smooth, well-dressed, the kind of man who'd never had dirt under his fingernails or blood on his hands. He drove a black Mercedes, wore expensive suits, and had the predatory smile of someone who took what he wanted without considering the consequences. Through high-powered binoculars, Walter watched them at their usual corner table. Miranda was animated, gesticulating as she spoke, while Curtis leaned back with the confidence of a man who controlled the conversation. At one point, Curtis reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in an intimacy that made Walter's jaw clench. But it was what happened next that transformed Walter's suspicions into operational awareness. Curtis pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. Miranda opened it carefully, her face going pale as she examined the contents. Walter adjusted his binoculars and caught a glimpse of what looked like photographs and documents before Miranda quickly closed the envelope. Whatever was in that envelope had shaken her. Good. As Walter watched, Curtis's demeanor changed from casual lover to serious businessman. He was giving Miranda instructions, his finger tapping the table for emphasis while she nodded reluctantly. When their meeting ended, Curtis kissed her cheek with the possessive confidence of ownership, while Miranda's smile looked forced and brittle. Walter had seen enough strategy sessions to recognize one when it happened. Curtis Hawkins wasn't just sleeping with his wife. They were planning something. That evening, Walter sat in his home office, reviewing the surveillance photos he'd taken over the past months. Curtis Hawkins had a history that disappeared into shadow after a certain point, the kind of background scrub that suggested either law enforcement connections or criminal expertise. More troubling were the financial records Walter had been quietly monitoring. Miranda had opened 3 credit cards he didn't know about, along with a bank account that showed regular deposits from an untraceable source. Someone was paying her for something, and given Curtis's involvement, Walter doubted it was anything legal. His computer chimed with an encrypted email from Jerome Gardner, a former Marine intelligence specialist who now ran a private security firm. Walter had reached out to him weeks ago, trading favors from their military days for a deep background check on both Miranda and Curtis. The report made for interesting reading. Curtis Hawkins had connections to several unsolved murders in California, all wealthy men who died under suspicious circumstances. Miranda's background was less violent, but more calculating. She'd been married twice before Walter, both husbands dying in accidents that left her substantially wealthier. Walter leaned back in his chair, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with military precision. Miranda hadn't married him for love or even his military benefits. She'd married him for his life insurance policy, a substantial payout that would set her up comfortably for life. The only problem was Lucas. As Walter's legal heir and beneficiary, the boy represented a complication that would need to be resolved if Miranda wanted to collect her windfall. Walter's blood chilled as he realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just adultery. It was the methodical setup for a double murder made to look like a home invasion or accident. His phone buzzed with a text message from Miranda. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. Another lie. According to the GPS tracker he'd installed in her car, she was at Curtis's apartment in Belltown. Walter closed the laptop and walked to his bedroom closet, where his Marine Corps gear was stored in a locked case. He hadn't touched most of it since his discharge, but tonight felt like a good time to remember who he'd been before civilian life had made him soft. The Glock 19 felt familiar in his hands, muscle memory guiding him through a functions check that was as automatic as breathing. Beside it lay the tactical vest that had stopped 3 Taliban bullets, along with equipment that most civilians never saw outside of movies. Walter Stone had spent 20 years learning how to kill people efficiently and quietly. If Miranda and Curtis want to play deadly games, they were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong target. Outside, Seattle's rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean in preparation for the blood that was about to be spilled. Chapter 2. Predators and Prey. The abandoned warehouse in Soto felt like every other kill house Walter had cleared during his military career. Too many shadows, too many angles for potential ambush. He moved through the darkness with practiced silence, night vision goggles turning the world into green-tinted clarity as he observed Curtis Hawkins conducting what appeared to be a business meeting. 3 men in expensive suits surrounded a table where Curtis laid out photographs and documents with the precision of a military briefing. Walter recognized the tactical setup. This wasn't amateur hour. Curtis was operating with the kind of organizational structure that suggested either extensive criminal experience or professional training. The timeline is accelerated, Curtis was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the warehouse's acoustics. Miranda confirmed that Stone's nightmares are getting worse. He's been taking sleeping pills, staying up late in his office. Perfect window for what we have planned. Walter adjusted his position to get a better angle on the documents Curtis was displaying. Even through the night vision, he could make out floor plans of his own house, detailed schedules of his daily routines, and what looked like insurance policy documentation. "What about the kid?" asked one of Curtis's associates, a thin man with nervous energy who kept checking his watch. "Collateral damage," Curtis replied without emotion. Miranda was clear about that from the beginning. No witnesses, no complications, no loose ends that could tie back to us later. The casual way Curtis discussed murdering Lucas made Walter's finger tighten on his rifle's trigger. Only years of discipline kept him from ending the conversation permanently. He needed more intelligence first. Specifically, he needed to know exactly what Miranda had agreed to. "The insurance payout is substantial," Curtis continued, spreading additional documents across the table. $2 million for Stone, another $500,000 for the boy. Miranda's been the beneficiary on both policies for over a year. Walter felt ice form in his chest. Miranda had been planning this for at least a year, systematically positioning herself to profit from their deaths while playing the role of loving wife and stepmother. "Timeline?" asked another associate, this one built like a former bouncer. "Next week. Miranda will make sure they're both home Tuesday night. She'll disable the security system, leave the back door unlocked. You going fast, make it look like a burglary gone wrong. 2 bullets each, steal some electronics and jewelry to sell the robbery angle." Walter had heard enough. He began his withdrawal, moving through the warehouse with the same ghost-like silence that had made him legendary among his Marine reconnaissance unit. Curtis and his associates never knew death had been watching them from the shadows. The drive home gave Walter time to process what he'd learned and plan his response. Miranda hadn't just betrayed him. She'd signed death warrants for both him and Lucas. The magnitude of her treachery went beyond adultery into something far more sinister. At home, Lucas was doing homework at the kitchen table while Miranda chatted on her phone in the living room. The domestic scene would have been comforting if Walter didn't now know that his wife was coordinating the murder of everyone in the house. "How was your day, son?" Walter asked, settling into the chair across from Lucas. "Good. I got an A on my history test, the one about military tactics in World War II. Lucas's pride was evident, the boy hungry for any sign of approval from the father he idolized. "Outstanding. Maybe this weekend we can visit the Museum of Flight, check out some of the aircraft displays." Walter was already planning contingencies, ways to get Lucas out of the house if the situation deteriorated rapidly. Miranda ended her phone call and joined them in the kitchen, her smile bright and artificial. "Sorry about that. My trainer had to reschedule tomorrow's session." Another lie, delivered with practiced ease. "No problem," Walter replied, studying her face for any sign of guilt or hesitation. What he saw was worse than he'd expected. Miranda showed no emotional conflict about planning to murder a 14-year-old boy. She was a sociopath with excellent acting skills. "I was thinking," Miranda continued, moving closer to Walter and placing her hand on his shoulder, "maybe we should plan a family vacation. Somewhere tropical, just the 3 of us." The suggestion was probably designed to establish her as a caring stepmother before Lucas's death, creating a narrative of grief and loss for investigators. Walter covered her hand with his, applying just enough pressure to see her wince slightly. "That sounds perfect. We should definitely spend more time together as a family." His voice carried undertones that made Miranda's smile falter momentarily. Later that night, after Lucas had gone to bed and Miranda was taking her usual evening bath, Walter activated the listening devices he'd installed throughout the house weeks ago. Military-grade surveillance equipment had certain advantages over civilian alternatives. It was virtually undetectable and provided crystal-clear audio. Miranda's phone conversation confirmed his worst fears. "Tuesday night, just like we discussed," she was saying. "I'll make sure Walter takes his sleeping pills around 10. Lucas is usually in bed by 9:30 on school nights. Your men should have a clean entry through the back door by 11. The voice on the other end was Curtis, though Walter was recording everything through encrypted equipment that would provide admissible evidence if necessary. Not that he planned to involve law enforcement. Some situations required more direct solutions. What about afterward? Curtis asked. I play the grieving widow perfectly. Throw myself into planning the funerals. Maybe have a very public breakdown at the service. Give it 6 months, then we can quietly start seeing each other openly. Miranda's laugh was cold and calculating. A year from now, we'll be living on a beach somewhere with $3 million and no complications. Walter ended the recording and sat back in his office chair, staring at equipment that had just documented his wife planning his murder with the enthusiasm of someone organizing a dinner party. 20 years of military service had exposed him to humanity's darkest impulses, but Miranda's casual attitude toward murdering Lucas was something new. The smart play would be to take the evidence to the FBI, let them handle Curtis and his associates while Miranda faced federal charges for conspiracy to commit murder. But Walter had spent too many years watching bureaucracy fail the people who needed protection most. Curtis Hawkins and his team were professionals who would lawyer up and probably walk on technicalities. Miranda would claim coercion, manipulation, anything to reduce her sentence. Lucas would spend years testifying in courts that treated him like a piece of evidence instead of a traumatized kid who'd nearly been murdered by his stepmother. No, this situation required the kind of justice that didn't come with appeals processes or plea bargains. Walter opened his weapons safe and began conducting detailed inspections of equipment he hadn't touched since Afghanistan. The Glock 19 was familiar weight in his hands, but for what he had planned, he'd need more specialized tools. The tactical knife felt like an old friend, its balance perfect for close-quarters work. Beside it lay flashbang grenades, zip ties, and various pieces of equipment that officially didn't exist but had saved his life on multiple occasions. Tuesday night was 5 days away. That gave Walter enough time to conduct detailed reconnaissance on Curtis's associates, plan multiple contingencies, and prepare Lucas for what was coming without traumatizing the boy unnecessarily. Most importantly, it gave him time to design a response that would be educational for everyone involved. Curtis and Miranda thought they were predators hunting easy prey. They were about to learn that they'd targeted someone who'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of killing predators. Walter's phone chimed with another text from Miranda. Love you, baby. Sweet dreams. He replied, Love you too. See you in the morning. Outside, Seattle's night sounds continued their familiar rhythm. Traffic, sirens, the distant sound of a train crossing the industrial district. Normal sound from a normal city where normal people lived normal lives. But inside the stone house, a Marine was preparing for war. Chapter 3. The calm before. Sunday morning brought deceptively peaceful sunshine streaming through the kitchen windows as Walter prepared breakfast for Lucas while Miranda slept late upstairs. The domestic routine felt surreal given what Walter now knew was coming. But he'd learned long ago that maintaining normalcy was crucial before combat operations. Dad, can I ask you something? Lucas said, looking up from his pancakes with the serious expression he wore when wrestling with difficult concepts. Always, son. Do you miss it? The Marines, I mean. Sometimes you get this look like you're seeing something the rest of us can't. Walter studied his son's face, recognizing an intelligence that reminded him of himself at that age. Lucas was asking deeper questions than he realized. Questions about purpose, identity, and what happened when a warrior's war ended. I miss the brotherhood, Walter said carefully. The certainty of mission and purpose. Civilian life is different, more complicated. Miranda doesn't understand you like Mom did. The words came out in a rush, as if Lucas had been holding them back for months. She gets angry when you have nightmares, says you should just get over it. Walter's jaw tightened. He suspected Miranda resented the psychological remnants of his military service. But hearing her dismiss his PTSD to Lucas added another layer to her betrayal. Some things stay with you, son. The key is learning to live with them without letting them control your choices. Walter paused, choosing his words carefully. Speaking of choices, I need you to do something for me this week. A favor, no questions asked. Lucas straightened, recognizing the tone his father used when issuing operational directives. Yes, sir. Tuesday night, I want you to go to Jerome Gardner's house after school. Remember Jerry from a barbecue last month? He's going to pick you up from school and keep you overnight. Is something wrong? Walter met his son's eyes with the honesty that had always defined their relationship. Something might be. I can't give you details yet, but I need to know you're safe while I handle some family business. Lucas nodded without further questions, soldier's son understanding that sometimes information was compartmentalized for good reasons. After Lucas left for school, Walter began his final preparations. The house would become a battlefield Tuesday night, and every advantage would be crucial for survival. He started in the basement, where he'd already installed additional lighting and surveillance equipment disguised as routine maintenance. The circuit breakers were modified to allow him to control power to specific areas of the house, creating darkness where he needed it while maintaining visibility where it served his purposes. The kitchen received special attention. Walter removed several knives from their magnetic strip, replacing them with training dummies while securing the real weapons in strategic locations throughout the house. Curtis's men would be looking for weapons to use against him. Finding only useless replicas would be their first unpleasant surprise. Miranda's morning routine was predictable. Gym from 9 to 11. Lunch with friends she claimed were book club members, but were actually more of Curtis's associates. Then shopping or appointments that served as cover for operational planning. While she was gone, Walter accessed her personal computer using techniques Jerome had taught him during their intelligence training. Miranda's digital security was amateur level, her passwords variations on Curtis's name that took Walter less than 10 minutes to crack. What he found in her email history made him grateful Lucas wasn't in the house. The correspondence between Miranda and Curtis went back 18 months, beginning with what appeared to be casual flirtation, but quickly evolving into detailed discussions about Walter's military disability payments, life insurance policies, and methods for accessing his financial accounts after his death. More disturbing were the research files Miranda had compiled on Walter's combat service, his psychological profile, and his daily routines. She'd been studying him with the thoroughness of an intelligence analyst, cataloging weaknesses and vulnerabilities like a professional interrogator. One email thread made Walter's blood run cold. Curtis, what about the kid? Stepson could complicate inheritance. Miranda, not biological. No legal claim if Walter dies first. Curtis, insurance policy lists him as beneficiary too. Miranda, accidents happen. Grieving stepmother, tragic loss, very sad. Who would suspect? Curtis, you're sure you can go through with it? Miranda, he's not my blood. Just a reminder of Walter's previous life. Honestly, it'll be a relief. Walter printed the entire email chain, along with financial records showing payments Curtis had been making to Miranda for over a year. The evidence painted a clear picture of premeditated murder for profit, with Lucas's death planned as casually as any other household chore. By the time Miranda returned home that afternoon, Walter had transformed their house into a kill zone that would give him every possible advantage while appearing completely normal to casual observation. "How was your day, honey?" Miranda asked, kissing his cheek with the same artificial warmth she'd been displaying for months. "Productive. I've been thinking about what you said about spending more time together as a family." Walter pulled her close, feeling her tense slightly at his proximity. "Maybe we should plan something special for Tuesday night. Just the two of us after Lucas goes to bed." Miranda's smile flickered. "Tuesday? I thought, didn't you have that veterans meeting?" Another test, and she'd failed it. Walter had never mentioned any veterans meeting. Miranda was fishing to see if he suspected Tuesday night's timeline. "I can reschedule. Family comes first." Walter's voice carried undertones that made Miranda smile, look increasingly strained. "Of course. Family is everything." That evening, Walter conducted final reconnaissance on Curtis's apartment building in Belltown. The luxury high-rise had excellent security, multiple entry points, and the kind of anonymity that attracted people who preferred not to answer questions about their activities. From a coffee shop across the street, Walter observed Curtis meeting with the same associates from the warehouse. They were conducting final planning, probably discussing equipment loadouts and contingency procedures for Tuesday night's operation. Walter's military training automatically cataloged details that would be useful later. Which associate favored his right hand, who moved with the confidence of someone carrying concealed weapons, whose body language suggested leadership versus follower dynamics. The thin, nervous man was clearly the weak link. He kept checking his watch, smoking cigarettes with shaking hands, and deferring to the others in ways that suggested he was new to whatever organization Curtis represented. The bouncer type was more dangerous, professional demeanor, situational awareness, the kind of controlled movement that indicated combat experience. He would be Walter's primary threat during the initial engagement. Curtis himself remained the wild card. His background suggested intelligence and planning ability, but Walter had yet to see him in a tactical situation. Sometimes smooth operators folded when violence became immediate and personal. As Walter watched, Curtis handed each associate a manila envelope similar to the one he'd given Miranda. Payment for services to be rendered or final operational instructions. Either way, they were committed to Tuesday night's timeline. Walter's phone buzzed with a text from Miranda at the store. "Need anything?" He replied, "Just some family time. See you soon." The response came back immediately. "Can't wait." Walter pocketed his phone and began his drive home, mind already shifting into the operational mindset that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. Tuesday night would bring violence to his home, but it wouldn't be the kind Curtis and Miranda were expecting. They thought they were hunting a damaged veteran with PTSD and sleeping pill dependency. What they would encounter instead was a Marine recon operative with 20 years of experience in close-quarters combat and a very personal reason to win. The predator was becoming the prey, though they didn't know it yet. Chapter 4. Intel and Preparation. Monday night, Walter lay in bed listening to Miranda's controlled breathing as she pretended to sleep beside him. The performance was impressive, steady rhythm, occasional soft sighs, even the slight movement that suggested natural sleep patterns. If Walter hadn't known she was planning his murder, he might have been convinced. At 2 a.m., Miranda's phone vibrated silently against the nightstand. She waited exactly 30 seconds before carefully sliding out of bed and padding to the bathroom, closing the door with practiced silence. Walter had installed listening devices throughout the house, including the master bathroom. Miranda's whispered conversation came through his earpiece with perfect clarity. "Everything's set for tomorrow," she was saying. "Walter's been taking the sleeping pills regularly. I'll make sure he doubles up tomorrow night. Tell him I'm worried about his nightmares." Curtis's voice carried the confidence of someone whose plans were proceeding smoothly. "My team is ready. Entry through the back door at 11:15, exactly as discussed. They'll be in and out in under 10 minutes. What about afterward? The investigation. Home invasion gone wrong. It happens all the time in Seattle. 2 victims, both shot during the robbery. You were conveniently spending the night at your sister's house. Perfect alibi with witnesses." Miranda's laugh was soft and cold. "I've already planted the seeds with the neighbors. Mention how worried I've been about Walter's behavior lately, his drinking, the way he handles his weapons. When this happens, everyone will remember that I was the concerned wife who tried to get him help." Walter filed away every detail, understanding now how thoroughly Miranda had prepared the battlefield. She hadn't just planned their murders. She'd orchestrated the entire aftermath, from police investigation to insurance claims to her own reputation as a grieving widow. "One more thing," Curtis continued. "The boy's room is right next to the master bedroom. If he wakes up during the operation—" "Handle it," Miranda interrupted. "I've already told you, no witnesses. Lucas has never liked me anyway. This solves multiple problems." The casual way she discussed murdering a 14-year-old boy confirmed everything Walter needed to know about his wife's character. Miranda wasn't just greedy. She was genuinely evil, the kind of person who viewed other human beings as obstacles to be eliminated when convenient. After Miranda returned to bed and resumed her fake sleep, Walter slipped out of the house through the basement exit he'd prepared weeks ago. His final reconnaissance mission would determine exactly what kind of opposition he'd be facing. Curtis's apartment building in Belltown was a glass and steel monument to Seattle's tech boom, the kind of place where wealthy residents paid premium prices for privacy and security. Walter bypassed the lobby entirely, using skills learned during urban warfare training to access the building through its parking garage. The 23rd floor was quiet at 3 in the morning, upscale condos filled with sleeping tech executives and their families. Curtis's unit was at the end of the hall, its door marked with the kind of security measures that suggested the occupant had enemies. Walter defeated the locks in under 60 seconds using tools that officially didn't exist, slipping into the apartment with ghost-like silence. What he found inside confirmed his worst suspicions about Curtis Hawkins. The main room was set up like a tactical operations center. Multiple computer monitors, communication equipment, and weapon storage that belonged in a military armory rather than a civilian residence. Curtis wasn't just a criminal. He was running some kind of professional assassination service. File cabinets contained dossiers on dozens of targets, all wealthy men with substantial life insurance policies and wives who'd become widows under suspicious circumstances. Miranda wasn't Curtis's first client. She was simply the latest in a long line of women who'd hired him to eliminate inconvenient husbands. Walter photographed everything using equipment that would provide admissible evidence, though he doubted the legal system would ever see these files. Some problems required more direct solutions than courtrooms could provide. The weapons cache was impressive. Military-grade rifles, handguns with filed serial numbers, and specialized equipment that suggested Curtis had law enforcement or military connections. Walter recognized several items that were restricted to government agencies, indicating corruption at levels that would complicate any official investigation. More interesting was the operational planning table, where Curtis had laid out detailed schematics of Walter's house, complete with entry routes, target locations, and extraction procedures. The plan was professionally executed, accounting for multiple contingencies and potential complications. Except for one thing. Curtis had made his plans based on targeting a psychologically damaged veteran with diminished capabilities. The real Walter Stone wasn't the broken man Miranda had described to her lover. Walter completed his intelligence gathering and slipped out of the apartment, leaving no trace of his presence. The elevator ride to the parking garage gave him time to process what he'd learned and finalize his response. Curtis's operation was larger and more dangerous than Walter had initially suspected, but also presented opportunities. The apartment contained evidence of multiple murders, financial records linking Curtis to organized crime, and enough illegal weapons to put him away forever. More importantly, it gave Walter insight into Curtis's tactical mindset. The man was professional but overconfident, accustomed to targeting victims who couldn't fight back. He'd never faced someone with Walter's training and experience. Back home, Walter spent the remaining hours before dawn making final preparations. The house was already configured for combat, but tonight's intelligence had revealed specific details about Curtis's team composition and probable tactics. The nervous associate would likely be positioned as a lookout, probably in a vehicle outside while the other two conducted the actual killings. The bouncer type would handle Walter while Curtis dealt with Lucas, a division of labor that suggested Curtis enjoyed the personal aspects of his work. Walter's response would account for all three, but it would begin with the two who entered his home. After that, he'd deal with Curtis and Miranda in ways that would serve as educational experiences. At 6 a.m., Lucas came downstairs for breakfast, finding his father already dressed and alert despite the early hour. "You're up early, Dad." "Old habits. Remember what we discussed yesterday? Jerome is picking you up after school. You'll be staying at his place tonight." Lucas nodded, then paused with his cereal spoon halfway to his mouth. "Dad, whatever's happening tonight, be careful, okay?" Walter met his son's eyes, seeing an understanding there that went beyond the boy's years. "I will be." "And Lucas? Whatever you hear about tonight, whatever anyone tells you happened, remember that I love you and everything I do is to protect our family." "I know." Lucas's voice carried absolute faith in his father's abilities and intentions. After Lucas left for school, Walter began his final equipment check. The weapons were cleaned and loaded, positioned in locations that would give him maximum tactical advantage. The surveillance system was active, recording everything for potential evidence while providing real-time intelligence about his opponent's movements. Most importantly, Walter activated the emergency beacon that would alert Jerome Gardner if something went wrong. Jerome was former Marine intelligence with his own reasons to dislike people who hurt military families. If Walter didn't survive the night, Jerome would ensure that justice was still served. At noon, Miranda announced she was spending the afternoon with her sister, establishing her alibi for the evening's events. Walter kissed her goodbye, noting how she lingered in the embrace as if trying to memorize the moment. "I love you," she whispered against his ear. "I love you too," Walter replied, meaning it as both truth and epitaph. After Miranda left, Walter had the house to himself for final preparations. He moved through rooms he'd shared with his wife for 3 years, seeing them now as a battlefield where innocence would die alongside the guilty. By evening, everything was ready. Walter had transformed from husband and father into the weapon the Marine Corps had spent 20 years perfecting. Tonight, Curtis Hawkins and his team would learn why Marines were called the most dangerous animals on the planet. The predators were coming, but they were walking into a trap that would close with lethal finality. Chapter 5. The Night of Reckoning. Walter lay in his darkened bedroom at 10:45 p.m., listening to the house settle around him while rain drummed against the windows. To anyone watching, he appeared to be deeply asleep, controlled breathing, relaxed posture, the stillness of someone under the influence of prescription sleeping medication. The reality was different. Walter's senses were hyper-alert, cataloging every sound from the neighborhood around him. A car door closing 2 blocks away. Footsteps on wet pavement. The distinctive click of tactical equipment being adjusted. They were coming. At exactly 11:10 p.m., Walter's motion sensors detected movement in the backyard. 2 figures approached the house with professional stealth, while thermal imaging confirmed a third person remaining in a vehicle at the front curb. Curtis's team was executing their plan exactly as Walter had anticipated. The back door lock disengaged with barely a whisper. Miranda had indeed disabled the security system and left their entry point accessible. Walter heard 2 sets of footsteps enter his home, moving with the controlled precision of professionals who'd done this before. Through his earpiece, Walter monitored their whispered communications. Thermal shows 2 targets upstairs, both in bedrooms. Moving to engage. Copy. Target 1 is the primary. Target 2 is secondary. Make it quick and quiet. Walter's night vision goggles turned his bedroom into green-tinted clarity as the first intruder reached the top of the stairs. The bouncer type, exactly as predicted, moving with tactical competence toward the master bedroom, while Curtis headed for Lucas's room. Except Lucas wasn't home, and Walter wasn't the helpless victim they expected to find. The intruder eased open Walter's bedroom door, revealing what appeared to be a sleeping man under covers arranged to suggest human form. The pillow positioning was perfect, the outline convincing enough to draw the assassin forward. Walter was pressed against the wall beside the door, invisible in the darkness until the moment his target committed to the approach. 20 years of close-quarters combat compressed into 3 seconds of lethal efficiency. The tactical knife slid between ribs and into the heart with surgical precision, cutting off any sound before it could form. The intruder's eyes widened in shock as he recognized his mistake, then went blank as death claimed him. Walter caught the falling body, lowering it silently to the floor while already tracking Curtis's movement toward Lucas's room. Through his surveillance system, he could see Curtis discovering the empty bedroom, confusion replacing confidence as his plan encountered the first major deviation. Target 2 is not here, Curtis whispered into his radio. Bedroom is empty. The response came from their lookout. Thermal only showed 2 signatures. Maybe the kid's somewhere else in the house. Walter's voice came through Curtis's earpiece, transmitted through equipment he'd taken from the dead assassin. Target eliminated. The boy. Curtis's relief was audible. Good work. Where's the kid? Check the basement, Walter replied, modulating his voice to match the dead man's tone and cadence. Movement detected downstairs. Curtis moved toward the basement stairs while Walter shadowed him through the house, staying in blind spots that his surveillance system had mapped with mathematical precision. The predator had become prey, though he didn't realize it yet. The basement was Walter's killing ground. Controlled lighting, multiple escape routes, and acoustic properties that would contain sound while providing perfect audio clarity. As Curtis descended the stairs, motion sensors triggered recording equipment that would document everything for potential evidence. "I don't see anyone down here," Curtis whispered. Walter's response came from directly behind him. "That's because you're looking in the wrong direction." Curtis spun around, handgun rising with professional speed that might have been impressive against a civilian target. But Walter had spent 20 years perfecting the art of close-quarters combat, and Curtis's training was about to prove inadequate. The disarm was textbook Marine Corps, simultaneous strike to the weapon hand while closing distance to deny shooting angles. Curtis's gun went sliding across the basement floor as Walter's knee connected with his solar plexus, doubling him over for the follow-up strike that rendered him unconscious. When Curtis woke up, he was zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of Walter's basement workshop, surrounded by tools that had been arranged with surgical precision. Industrial lighting illuminated his situation with harsh clarity. He was completely helpless in the hands of someone who clearly understood the art of interrogation. Walter sat in a chair directly across from Curtis, close enough to see the fear and confusion in his captive's eyes. The dead assassin's radio crackled nearby, the lookout growing increasingly concerned about the lack of communication from his partners. "Hello, Curtis." Walter's voice was conversational, almost friendly. "I believe you know my wife." Curtis's eyes darted around the basement, taking in the tactical equipment and specialized tools with growing comprehension. "You're supposed to be asleep. Drugged," Miranda said. Miranda said a lot of things. Most of them lies designed to make me an easy target. Walter held up a digital recorder. "Would you like to hear her discussing your plans to murder my son?" The recording played Curtis's own voice along with Miranda's casual agreement to kill Lucas, their conversation documented with perfect clarity. Curtis's face went pale as he realized the scope of his tactical failure. "This is a misunderstanding," Curtis said, his professional composure cracking under stress. "Miranda hired me for a different job entirely." Walter's fist connected with Curtis's jaw in a precisely calculated blow that rattled his teeth without causing unconsciousness. "Let's establish some ground rules, Curtis. Every lie earns you a reminder about the importance of honesty. Truth gets rewarded with questions about your other victims." The interrogation that followed was educational for both men. Curtis learned what it felt like to be systematically broken down by someone with superior expertise in causing pain. Walter learned about a criminal network that had been murdering wealthy husbands for their insurance money, with law enforcement connections that had kept the operation protected for years. By the time Walter's phone buzzed with a text message, Curtis had provided names, dates, financial records, and detailed confessions about 17 murders across 3 states. The evidence would have impressed FBI investigators, though Walter doubted they'd ever see it. The text was from Miranda, right on schedule. "Everything okay at home? I'm worried about you." Walter used Curtis's phone to respond. "Target eliminated." "The boy." Miranda's reply came immediately. "Leave no one alive." Walter showed the message to Curtis, whose remaining defiance collapsed entirely. "She's really going to kill a 14-year-old child," Curtis whispered. "She was." Past tense. Walter stood and moved to his weapons rack, selecting items with the care of a surgeon, choosing instruments. Your lookout is probably getting nervous about the radio silence. Time to arrange a reunion. Walter's call to the lookout was brief and convincing. Phase 1 complete. Need immediate extraction. Complications developed. The lookout arrived within minutes, abandoning his surveillance position to help his partners escape what he assumed was a successful operation gone slightly wrong. Walter was waiting behind the front door when the thin, nervous man entered the house calling for Curtis. The suppressed pistol made barely a whisper as it ended the lookout's participation in the evening's events. Walter checked the body efficiently. No identification, but the same kind of untraceable weapons and equipment that marked all three as professional criminals. With Curtis's team eliminated, only 2 targets remained. Walter returned to the basement, where Curtis sat contemplating his own mortality with the clarity that came from facing inevitable death. "Your associates are dead," Walter informed him matter-of-factly. Which brings us to the question of what happens next. "You're going to kill me," Curtis said. It wasn't a question. "Eventually. First, we're going to visit Miranda. I want her to understand exactly how thoroughly her plan failed before she joins you." Walter's smile was thin and cold. "She's waiting in her car outside, probably wondering why you haven't called to confirm our deaths." Time to give her some news she wasn't expecting. Chapter 6. Masks and Revelations. The black sedan sat at the end of Walter's street, positioned for quick escape once Curtis confirmed the success of his operation. Through thermal imaging, Walter could see 2 figures in the front seats, Miranda in the passenger seat, and a driver he didn't recognize but assumed was another member of Curtis's network. Walter had Curtis secured in the back of his own vehicle, the man's face covered with a tactical mask that would conceal his identity until the moment Walter chose to reveal it. The setup was perfect for what Walter had planned, a revelation that would strip away Miranda's composure and expose the true depth of her betrayal. "Remember," Walter whispered to Curtis as they approached the sedan, "you're my partner in this operation. Miranda thinks you're the one who just murdered her husband and stepson. Play the role convincingly, or I'll let her watch you die very slowly." Curtis nodded, understanding that his survival depended on a performance that would convince Miranda that Walter Stone was dead. Walter positioned himself at the passenger window and tapped on the glass. Miranda turned, her face lighting up with relief and anticipation when she saw the masked figure she assumed was Curtis's associate. She rolled down the window. "Is it done?" Walter modulated his voice to match the dead assassin's tone. "Target eliminated. Clean entry, no complications." "And the boy?" Miranda's question carried eager anticipation rather than reluctance. "Handled as instructed." Walter watched Miranda's face carefully, seeing relief and satisfaction rather than any trace of guilt or regret. "Perfect." Miranda turned to speak with the driver, a middle-aged man with the look of someone who managed logistics for criminal operations. "Contact the insurance company first thing tomorrow morning. I'll need to file claims for both policies." "Already prepared," the driver replied. "We just need to wait for the bodies to be discovered. Your alibi is solid. Your sister will confirm you spent the night at her house, distraught about Walter's increasingly erratic behavior." Walter absorbed every detail of their conversation, understanding now that Miranda's network was larger and more sophisticated than he'd initially realized. This wasn't just about one insurance fraud. It was an organized operation that had been killing husbands systematically. "There's something else," Walter said, still maintaining the vocal disguise. "We need to show you something about the primary target. Security complications we didn't anticipate." Miranda's expression shifted to concern. "What kind of complications?" "Better if you see for yourself. Follow us." Walter led the sedan to an abandoned warehouse district where he'd prepared the final phase of his operation. The location was isolated, soundproof, and equipped with everything necessary for extended interrogation sessions. Miranda followed without suspicion, probably assuming Curtis's team needed to debrief about unexpected difficulties during the operation. She had no idea she was being led to a place where her betrayal would be fully exposed and appropriately punished. The warehouse interior was arranged like a theatrical stage. Industrial lighting focused on a metal chair where Curtis sat with his tactical mask still concealing his identity. Miranda and her driver entered confidently, expecting to celebrate a successful murder. "Where's Curtis?" Miranda asked, looking around for the man she thought was coordinating the operation. Walter stepped into the light, removing his own mask with theatrical precision. "He's right here, Miranda, though he's not quite the man you thought he was." The color drained from Miranda's face as she recognized her supposedly dead husband. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish drowning in air, while her mind struggled to process information that didn't match her expectations. "Hello, darling," Walter said conversationally. "Interesting evening. I learned so many fascinating things about my wife's hobbies." Miranda's driver was reaching for a concealed weapon when Walter's suppressed pistol ended his participation in the conversation. The body dropped with a wet thud that echoed through the warehouse, leaving Miranda alone with her husband and the growing realization that her plan had failed catastrophically. "This is impossible," Miranda whispered. "You're dead." "Curtis's team is dead," Walter interrupted. "All three of them. Very unpleasant deaths. Actually, though they provided excellent information about your little insurance fraud network." He moved closer, and Miranda could see something in his eyes that made her want to run. But there was nowhere to go. The warehouse doors had closed behind them, and her husband was holding the only weapon in sight. Walter reached over and removed Curtis's mask, revealing the battered face of the man Miranda had been sleeping with for over a year. Curtis's eyes were swollen shut, his lips split and bleeding, clear evidence of the interrogation he'd endured. "Curtis has been very cooperative," Walter continued. "Amazing how talkative people become when they understand that lies only make their situation worse. He told me fascinating stories about your previous marriages, your systematic approach to murdering husbands for their insurance money." Miranda's legs buckled, and she collapsed into a chair that Walter had positioned for exactly this purpose. The comfortable fiction she'd constructed, that she was simply an unfaithful wife trapped in an unhappy marriage, was crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. 17 murders, Curtis tells me. 17 wealthy men who died under suspicious circumstances, leaving behind grieving widows who collected substantial insurance payouts. Walter's voice carried the clinical detachment of someone reciting statistics. "You weren't just cheating on me, Miranda. You're a serial killer who specializes in marrying and murdering successful men." "That's not. I never." "Curtis forced me." Miranda's attempts at denial collapsed as quickly as she formed them. Walter activated a digital recorder, filling the warehouse with Curtis's pain-distorted confession. Miranda's voice joined the recording, discussing murder with the casual enthusiasm of someone planning a dinner party. "Interesting how your story changes when you think no one's listening," Walter observed. "Very different from the loving wife persona you've been maintaining." He moved to a metal table where he'd arranged various tools with surgical precision. "Curtis also provided detailed information about your network's standard operating procedures, how you select targets, establish relationships, plan the murders, collect the insurance money." Walter selected a tactical knife and tested its edge. "What I find most fascinating is your attitude toward Lucas. Not just indifference. Active hatred for a 14-year-old boy whose only crime was reminding you that I had a life before you." "Walter, please," Miranda sobbed. "We can work this out. I'll confess to everything, testify against Curtis, help you expose the whole network." "You already have testified," Walter interrupted, holding up the recorder. "Very thoroughly. The question now is what happens to people who try to murder my family." Miranda looked around the warehouse, taking in the soundproofing, the isolated location, the specialized equipment that suggested her husband had been planning this confrontation for some time. "You're going to kill me," she whispered. Walter's smile was thin and cold. "I'm going to give you the same choice I gave Curtis's associates. Quick and relatively painless, or slow and educational. Your choice depends on how cooperative you are about providing information I still need." "What information?" "Names, locations, financial records, everyone involved in your network, every victim you've murdered, every law enforcement official you bribed." Walter's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "You're going to help me dismantle the entire operation, starting with the insurance investigators who've been covering up your crimes." Miranda stared at her husband, seeing something in his eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. This wasn't the psychologically damaged veteran she'd married and planned to murder. This was a professional killer who'd spent 20 years perfecting the art of eliminating threats to innocent people. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Long enough to document everything. Your emails, financial records, meetings with Curtis, even recordings of your conversations about murdering Lucas. Walter moved closer, and Miranda could smell gun oil and violence on his clothing. What I didn't know was the scope of your operation. How many other husbands, how many other children you've murdered for money? We never killed children before, Miranda said desperately. Lucas he was going to be the first. Congratulations. You chose the worst possible target for your first child murder. Walter's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Did you really think I wouldn't notice my wife planning to kill my son? The next 3 hours would be educational for everyone involved. Miranda would learn what it felt like to be systematically broken down by someone with superior expertise in extracting information. Curtis would watch his partner suffer the same techniques he'd endured earlier, and Walter would gather the final pieces of evidence needed to destroy a criminal network that had been murdering innocent families for profit. The warehouse was soundproof, the night was long, and justice was finally being served. Chapter 7. Unraveling the Web. Miranda's screams echoed through the warehouse as Walter applied pressure to specific nerve points with surgical precision. 3 hours of professional interrogation had reduced his wife to a broken shell of her former manipulative self, but the information she'd provided was worth every moment of discomfort she'd endured. The criminal network was far larger than Walter had suspected. 17 murdered husbands across 5 states, with law enforcement corruption reaching into federal agencies. Miranda hadn't just been Curtis's lover. She'd been the operational coordinator for a systematic insurance fraud scheme that had generated over $23 million in illegal profits. Please, Miranda sobbed through split lips and swollen eyes. I've told you everything. Names, locations, bank accounts, everything. Walter consulted his notes, cross-referencing Miranda's information with Curtis's earlier confession. The two accounts matched perfectly. Too perfectly for either of them to be lying about the scope of their crimes. Almost everything, Walter corrected. You haven't told me about the children. Miranda's face went white. What children? Walter's knife moved with surgical precision, opening a shallow cut across Miranda's forearm that would be painful but not immediately dangerous. Curtis mentioned that some of your victims had children who became inconvenient after their fathers died. What happened to those children? Nothing happened to them, Miranda said quickly. They were placed in foster care, or with relatives, or... The knife moved again, this time across her other arm. Truth, Miranda. What happened to the children who might have inherited money that you wanted? The breakdown that followed revealed the true scope of Miranda's evil. For children had died in accidents over the past 3 years. Drowning, car crashes, house fires that eliminated young heirs whose inheritance would have complicated Miranda's insurance claims. Walter had spent his military career fighting monsters who hurt innocent people, but Miranda represented something worse than enemy combatants or terrorists. She was a predator who targeted families, destroying children with the same casual efficiency she'd applied to murdering their fathers. Enough, Curtis said from his chair, his voice barely recognizable through his injuries. Just kill us both and be done with it. We're monsters. We deserve whatever you do to us. Walter looked at the two people who'd planned to murder his son, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Curtis was a professional criminal who'd built a career around violence, but he retained some vestige of conscience that made him sick at Miranda's casual attitude toward killing children. Miranda was something else entirely. A sociopath who viewed other human beings as resources to be exploited when useful and eliminated when inconvenient. She felt no guilt about the lives she destroyed, only regret at being caught. You're right about deserving whatever I do to you, Walter said, but killing you quickly would be a mercy you haven't earned. He moved to his equipment table and selected items with the care of a surgeon choosing instruments. You're going to help me contact every member of your network. We're going to arrange meetings where I can gather additional intelligence about their operations. They'll know something's wrong, Miranda protested. When Curtis doesn't report back. Curtis is going to report back, Walter interrupted. You're both going to maintain your normal communication patterns while I systematically dismantle your organization. Walter's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Miranda and Curtis would continue operating under his direct supervision, luring other network members into situations where he could eliminate them individually. The approach would take longer than simply killing everyone immediately, but it would ensure that no one escaped justice. Over the following weeks, Miranda and Curtis became unwilling assets in Walter's private war against their criminal organization. They made phone calls under his supervision, arranged meetings at locations he selected, and provided intelligence that allowed him to identify every person involved in their murder-for-profit scheme. The FBI agent who'd been taking bribes to suppress investigations was found dead in his home, an apparent suicide accompanied by a detailed confession that exposed the entire corruption network. The insurance investigators who'd been falsifying reports met similar fates, their deaths triggering federal investigations that would clean up the system. Most satisfying to Walter were the operational planners, the people like Curtis who'd been systematically murdering husbands and children for money. Each death was carefully staged to look accidental or self-inflicted, but the cumulative effect was the complete destruction of a criminal network that had operated with impunity for years. Miranda and Curtis watched their life's work collapse around them, understanding that Walter was methodically eliminating everyone they'd ever worked with or cared about. The isolation was psychological torture more effective than physical pain, stripping away their sense of purpose and identity until nothing remained but the knowledge of their impending deaths. "How long are you going to keep this up?" Curtis asked one evening as Walter reviewed intelligence reports about their network's remaining members. "Until everyone involved in hurting innocent families is dead," Walter replied without looking up from his notes. "Including the two of you." When Walter's smile was thin and cold. "When I'm satisfied that justice has been served completely." The final phase of the operation came 3 months after the night Miranda had tried to have Walter murdered. By then, every member of their criminal network was dead, their assets seized by federal agencies, and their victims' families notified about the true circumstances of their losses. Miranda and Curtis had served their purpose as intelligence assets. Now, they were simply loose ends that needed to be tied off. Walter prepared the warehouse's final chamber with the same attention to detail he'd applied to every aspect of the operation. 2 metal chairs positioned for optimal lighting, recording equipment to document their final confessions, and weapons arranged with surgical precision. "Any last words?" Walter asked as Miranda and Curtis contemplated their mortality with the clarity that came from facing inevitable death. Miranda looked at her husband, seeing something in his eyes that might have been genuine remorse. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For Lucas, for everything. I became something I never meant to be." Curtis nodded slowly. "We both did. The money. It made us forget that we were dealing with real people, real families." Walter studied their faces, looking for any sign of manipulation or deception. What he saw instead was exhaustion, defeat, and something that might have been genuine guilt about the lives they destroyed. "Sorry doesn't resurrect the 17 men you murdered," Walter said quietly. "It doesn't bring back the 4 children you killed to steal their inheritance. It doesn't erase the trauma you inflicted on families who trusted you." He moved to the weapons table and selected 2 identical pistols, checking their loads with professional efficiency. "But it's more conscience than you showed any of your victims." Walter placed the weapons on the floor between their chairs, just within reach of their zip-tied hands. "You have a choice. Quick and painless, taking responsibility for your crimes. Or I demonstrate some techniques I learned during 20 years of military service." Both Curtis and Miranda reached for the weapons without hesitation, understanding that Walter's alternative would be far worse than death. They'd seen enough of his work to know that survival was no longer an option. Only the manner of their deaths remained to be decided. The gunshots came seconds apart, echoing through the warehouse like thunder before fading into profound silence. Walter checked both bodies professionally, confirming their deaths with the same clinical detachment he'd maintained throughout the operation. Outside, Seattle's night sounds continued their familiar rhythm. Traffic, sirens, the distant sound of a train crossing the industrial district. Normal sounds from a normal city where normal people lived normal lives, unaware that justice had been served in the shadows. Walter Stone had come home to find his family targeted for murder by his own wife. He was leaving with that threat eliminated and a criminal network dismantled with surgical precision. The predator's work was finished. The hunter could finally rest. Chapter 8. Cleaning House. 6 months after Miranda's death, Walter sat in a federal courtroom watching the final members of her insurance fraud network receive life sentences for 17 counts of murder. The investigation had proceeded exactly as he'd planned. Evidence planted strategically, confessions recorded under duress, financial records that painted a clear picture of systematic criminal enterprise. FBI agent Dennis Mayo, the lead investigator on the case, had personally thanked Walter for his cooperation in exposing the network. If Mayo suspected that the evidence had been obtained through less than legal methods, he'd kept those suspicions to himself. Sometimes justice required flexibility in how evidence was gathered. Lucas sat beside his father in the gallery, now 15 and carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd survived genuine danger. The boy had never asked detailed questions about what happened the night Miranda tried to have them murdered, accepting Walter's explanation that some people made very bad choices and faced appropriate consequences. "Is it over?" Lucas asked quietly as the judge finished reading the sentences. Walter nodded, watching the last defendant be led away in shackles. "It's over. The people who hurt families are either dead or in prison for the rest of their lives." They drove home through Seattle streets that felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if removing predators from the ecosystem had allowed normal life to flourish. Walter had sold the house where Miranda had planned their murders, using the proceeds to purchase a smaller place in the suburbs where Lucas could finish high school without the memories of that night. The new house had better security, multiple escape routes, and sight lines that would give Walter advance warning of any threats. Old habits from his military career, but habits that had kept them alive when civilization's safeguards had failed. "Dad," Lucas said as they pulled into their driveway, "I know you can't tell me everything that happened, but I want you to know that I understand why you did what you did." Walter studied his son's face, seeing maturity beyond his years along with an understanding of moral complexity that most adults never developed. "What do you understand?" "That sometimes the system doesn't work. Sometimes bad people hurt innocent families and get away with it because they're smart or connected or lucky." Lucas paused, choosing his words carefully. "And sometimes someone has to step outside the system to make sure justice gets served." Walter felt pride mixed with concern. Lucas was developing the kind of moral clarity that had guided Walter through 20 years of military service, but that clarity could lead to dangerous places if not carefully channeled. "Justice is important," Walter agreed, "but so is restraint. The power to hurt people has to be balanced with wisdom about when that power should be used. You only hurt people who are trying to hurt our family," Lucas pointed out. "That seems like pretty clear moral territory to me." That evening, Walter received a phone call from Jerome Gardner, his former Marine intelligence colleague who'd provided backup during the operation against Miranda's network. "Saw the news about the sentencing," Jerome said. "Congratulations. That was a textbook dismantling operation." "Thanks, though I suspect we both know the real justice happened months ago." Jerome's laugh was dry. "Officially, I don't know anything about what really happened to those people. Unofficially, the world is a better place without them." Walter appreciated his friend's discretion. Jerome had provided crucial support during the operation: safe houses, equipment, intelligence analysis, while maintaining plausible deniability about the more direct aspects of Walter's response to Miranda's betrayal. "Any regrets?" Jerome asked. Walter considered the question seriously. Miranda and Curtis were dead, along with everyone else who'd participated in their criminal network. 17 families had received closure about their murdered relatives, and 4 dead children had been avenged. The corrupt officials who'd enabled the crimes were either dead or facing life sentences. "No regrets," Walter said finally. "Some situations don't have peaceful solutions. What's next for you?" Walter looked toward Lucas's room, where his son was doing homework while music played softly. normal teenage activities in a secure home where they could finally live without looking over their shoulders. "I'm thinking about teaching," Walter said. "Maybe high school history or criminal justice at the community college level. Lucas needs stability, and I've had enough of hunting predators for one lifetime." "Sound good. But Walter—" "Yeah. If you ever need backup again, you know how to reach me." Some of us understand that protecting innocent people sometimes requires unofficial methods. After the call ended, Walter walked through his house, checking locks and security systems with the automatic thoroughness of someone who'd learned that threats could come from the most unexpected directions. The house was secure, his son was safe, and the people who tried to destroy their family were dead or imprisoned. It was as close to a happy ending as someone in Walter's profession could expect. Later that night, Walter received one final message related to the case. A text from an unknown number that simply read, "Thank you." The message was probably from one of the victims' family members, someone who'd learned through the federal investigation that their loved one hadn't died in a random accident but had been murdered for insurance money. The court proceedings had provided official closure, but they'd never know that the real justice had been served months earlier in a soundproof warehouse. Walter deleted the message without responding. Anonymous gratitude was appreciated but unnecessary. He hadn't dismantled Miranda's criminal network for public recognition or thanks. He'd done it because predators had threatened his family, and eliminating threats was what Walter Stone did best. As he prepared for bed, Walter allowed himself to think about the future for perhaps the first time since Miranda's betrayal. Lucas would graduate high school, probably attend college, maybe even follow his father in a military service if that's what he chose. Normal problems for a normal family, the kind of complications that came from success rather than survival. Walter had spent 20 years as a professional warrior, defending his country against enemies foreign and domestic. He'd spent 6 months as a private enforcer, protecting his family against predators who'd infiltrated his own home. Now he could finally be what he'd always wanted to be, a father raising his son in a world where justice had been served and innocence was protected. The war was over. The warriors could finally come home. Chapter 9. The Final Silence. 1 year after the night Walter had been targeted for murder, he stood at the grave of an unknown soldier in Arlington National Cemetery, paying his respects to the brotherhood that had shaped his understanding of duty, honor, and sacrifice. Lucas stood beside him, both men understanding that some ceremonies were about more than the specific individuals being remembered. The federal investigation into Miranda's insurance fraud network had officially closed with the conviction of its final members. 17 families had received closure about their murdered relatives and substantial financial settlements from insurance companies that had been defrauded. The corrupt law enforcement officials who'd enabled the crimes were serving life sentences in federal facilities where their former authority meant nothing. To the outside world, justice had been served through the proper legal channels. Only Walter, Lucas, and Jerome Gardner knew that the real justice had been delivered months earlier in ways that would never appear in official records. "Dad," Lucas said quietly as they walked among the white headstones, "do you ever think about the people who didn't make it home?" Walter considered his son's question, understanding the deeper inquiry behind it. "Every day, the ones who died in combat, and the ones who came home but couldn't find peace. Like the families Miranda and Curtis killed. Like all the innocents who've been hurt by people who chose evil over good." Walter stopped at a memorial wall listing names of the fallen, finding several he'd served with during his deployments. The living have an obligation to the dead, to make sure their sacrifice meant something. Lucas nodded, absorbing lessons about moral responsibility that most teenagers never received. The boy had matured rapidly over the past year, developing an understanding of human nature that came from witnessing both its darkest and most protective aspects. As they returned to their hotel, Walter's phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted account he used for official communications. The text was brief but significant. New assignment available. Domestic threat. Interested. Walter deleted the message without responding. His hunting days were over, replaced by the more important mission of raising his son and building a life based on normal concerns rather than operational necessities. That evening, Walter and Lucas had dinner at a restaurant near their hotel, The conversation ranging from Lucas's college plans to Walter's job prospects as a high school history teacher. Normal family discussions about normal problems, the kind of comfortable complications that came from having a future to plan rather than immediate threats to survive. "I've been thinking," Lucas said as they finished their meal, "about what you said yesterday, about having obligations to people who can't protect themselves." Walter set down his coffee cup, recognizing the tone Lucas used when wrestling with complex moral issues. "What specifically? There are other families out there, aren't there? Other kids whose parents have been murdered by people like Miranda and Curtis, but nobody knows it because the killers are too smart or connected to get caught." The observation was accurate and troubling. Walter's elimination of one criminal network had undoubtedly prevented future murders, but other predators were certainly operating similar schemes across the country. The success of Miranda's operation had probably inspired imitators who'd learned to be more careful about evidence and witness elimination. Probably, Walter acknowledged, evil isn't unique or rare. It's a constant presence that good people have to actively oppose. So what's our responsibility to those families? Walter studied his son's face, seeing determination mixed with genuine concern for people they'd never meet. Lucas was developing the same moral clarity that had driven Walter through 20 years of military service, but channeled toward protecting innocent civilians rather than fighting foreign enemies. "Our first responsibility is to each other," Walter said carefully, "to building a stable life where we can be happy and secure. Everything else comes after that." Lucas nodded, but Walter could see the boy wasn't entirely satisfied with that answer. The teenager was beginning to understand that power carried obligations, that people with special skills and knowledge had duties to use those capabilities for good. It was a dangerous line of thinking for someone Walter's age. Men with his background who convinced themselves they were society's guardians sometimes lost sight of the difference between justice and revenge. But for Lucas, that moral clarity might become something more constructive if properly guided. What if we could help those families without risking our own safety? Lucas asked. Information sharing with law enforcement, consulting on investigations, maybe teaching other people how to recognize the warning signs? Walter felt pride, mixed with concern at his son's suggestion. Lucas was proposing legitimate ways to fight predators without becoming one himself, a path that could channel his protective instincts into socially acceptable forms of service. "That's worth considering," Walter said, "after you finish high school and college. This kind of work requires extensive training and emotional maturity. Like military service? Or law enforcement? FBI? Maybe, or specialized units that deal with organized crime." Walter paused, weighing his words carefully. The important thing is learning to work within systems rather than outside them, unless the situation is truly desperate. Lucas absorbed this guidance with the seriousness of someone who understood the distinction between necessary violence and chosen brutality. The boy had witnessed both during the past year, learning that sometimes good people had to do terrible things to protect innocent from monsters. As they prepared to fly back to Seattle, Walter reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. He'd begun as a career Marine, serving his country against foreign enemies. He'd become a husband and father, trying to build a normal civilian life. Then he'd been forced to become something darker, a predator hunter who'd eliminated threats through methods that would never appear in official reports. Now he was simply a father again, raising a son who understood both the necessity of violence and the importance of restraint. Lucas would face his own moral choices as he matured, but he'd do so with knowledge that most people never acquired about the true nature of evil and the cost of fighting it. The flight home was quiet, both men lost in their own thoughts as Seattle grew larger in the aircraft windows. The city looked peaceful from 30,000 feet, ordered streets, familiar landmarks, no visible sign of the darkness that had briefly threatened to consume Walter's family. As they descended toward Seattle-Tacoma Airport, Walter's phone chimed with one final message. The text was from an unknown sender, but the content made his blood chill. "Mr. Stone, my name is Detective Rob Novak, Seattle PD. We have questions about your wife's death and several other related matters. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." Walter showed the message to Lucas, whose face hardened with determination rather than fear. "Dad," the teenager said quietly, "whatever they think they know, whatever they're planning to do, we'll handle it together." Walter nodded, feeling pride in his son's courage mixed with concern about what new threats might be emerging. The past year had taught them both that evil was persistent, that predators adapted to new circumstances and sometimes struck back when their operations were disrupted. But they'd also learned that good people with proper training and moral clarity could prevail against seemingly impossible odds. Whatever Detective Novak wanted to discuss, Walter and Lucas would face it with the same systematic approach they'd used to survive Miranda's betrayal. The plane touched down in Seattle as the sun was setting over Elliott Bay, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Normal colors in a normal city where normal families lived normal lives, unaware of the monsters that sometimes walked among them or the guardians who kept them safe. Walter Stone had come home from war twice, once from Afghanistan and once from the private battlefield where his own wife had tried to have him murdered. Both times, he'd returned with scars that would never fully heal, but also with knowledge about the true cost of protecting innocence. Now he was preparing for whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that some wars were worth fighting and some enemies deserved no mercy. The hunter was home and ready for whatever predators might emerge from the shadows. Outside the airport, Seattle continued its familiar rhythm. Traffic, sirens, the distant sound of ferries crossing Puget Sound. Normal sounds from a normal city where justice had been served and families could sleep safely in their...
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.